Welcome back to our channel. The air is thick with salt and spice, the endless blue of the Indian Ocean stretching beyond the horizon. I'm a trader, a man chasing fortune across these vast waters, carrying the treasures of distant lands: cinnamon, cloves, pepper, and cardamom. But out here, beyond the sight of shore, the sea holds secrets darker than any storm. This is the story of the voyage when the spices began to seep into everything, and when an invisible sickness crept aboard, turning the promise of profit into a battle for survival. Close your eyes, let the noise of the world fade, and let's begin. The Stowaway in the Cinnamon Hold. July 1622, somewhere off the Malabar coast, aboard the Iram of Malabar. I have walked the length of this ship 1,000 times. From the silver-worn prow to the sweating curve of the rudder post, I know every creak in the hull, every scent: salt, rope, oil, sweat, the peppery bitterness of dried clove, the warm, honey-sharp perfume of cinnamon. The hold is my temple. I built my livelihood on the back of it. These bales, these sacks, these planks, soaked in the breath of empires. So when the cinnamon began to whisper, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't the rats. I've heard them before. No, this was different. A soft, wet stirring. The sort of sound a dying animal might make when it's too far gone to scream. We found him in the aft section of the hold, between two crates marked with the sigil of the Zamorin's estate. A child, no older than 8, crouched like a spider. His hair was matted, face streaked with resin and soot, lips chapped to blood. One eye swollen nearly shut, the other wide and black as an oil lamp's heart. In his hand he held a small carving, sandalwood, worn smooth with finger oil, no bigger than a chicken's egg. It was shaped like a man, or maybe a god, or both. Curved spine, empty eyes, arms crossed like ropes bound tight across its chest. None of us moved at first, even my quartermaster, a hard bastard who once split a thief's skull with a belaying pin, hesitated. There was something in that child's stare that made even the bravest among us flinch, as though we'd discovered something that hadn't meant to be found. He didn't speak. He didn't beg. Just held that talisman to his chest, back pressed, to the bulkhead like he'd vanish into the boards. I knelt, slowly. "What's your name, boy?" No answer. Just that hollow, unblinking look, like he'd been watching us for days from the shadows, like he knew things about us we didn't know, ourselves. We gave him water, bread soaked in coconut milk. He devoured it with animal swiftness, hands darting, body always pulled inward like a whip coiled to strike. There were scars on his arms, old ones, not made by ropes or lashes, but small and patterned, ritual, tribal, maybe even sacred. "How the hell did he get aboard?" my helmsman whispered later. "We've been at sea since Goa, and the hold was sealed in Cochin." "Then he boarded in Cochin," I replied. "Or before that. Doesn't matter. The men didn't like it. Superstition is a sailor's second skin, and children don't stow away on spice ships by accident, especially not ones who clutch carved gods and hide among cinnamon like they're waiting to be awakened." One of the crew, Yusuf, a Lamu man with old eyes, told me in private, "That thing he carries, it's a dada, a guardian, from the old forests. It keeps spirits out, or locks them in." I asked what that meant. He didn't answer. That night, the wind died. The sails hung limp as dead hands. The sea turned to glass, the moon swallowed by clouds the colour of old bruises. And below decks, men swore they heard movement in the cinnamon hold, a dragging sound like wood on bone. The child never slept, just sat with his knees to his chest, talisman in hand, watching. By the second day of dead wind, one of the crew tried to toss the boy overboard, said he was cursed, said the ship would not move until he was gone. I stopped him, drew steel and made it clear. We're not butchers, not savages, but even I began to wonder. On the third day, the child stood on the main deck at dawn. He had not spoken since we found him, hadn't made a sound, but there he stood, barefoot, skin caked in cinnamon dust, holding his sandalwood figure to the sun. And then, in a voice like dry leaves, he said, "Wind comes now." I didn't know whether to laugh or pray, but by noon the sails fluttered, and by dusk we were moving, fast, too fast. The sea that had been still as a mirror now rolled like a great heaving lung. The men didn't cheer, they just watched the boy, who had returned to the hold without another word. We kept him aboard. Where else could he go? I had a small bunk cleared near the galley. He eats little, speaks less, sleeps beneath the talisman, carved head tucked beneath his chin. Sometimes I catch him watching the horizon, as if he's waiting for something to follow us out of the dark. And at night, I dream of sandalwood trees, burning, of eyes in the hold that do not blink, of cinnamon that whispers secrets only the dead understand. We carry pepper, clove, and cardamom, and now we carry something else. Whispers of the Monsoon. Year of our Lord, 1622. Somewhere off the Malabar coast, Indian Ocean. They call it the edge of the world. I have sailed from the red-tiled roofs of Lisbon to the crescent shores of Zanzibar, from the sultry ports of Goa to the palm-fringed bays of Ceylon. But nothing tests a man more than the stretch of sea between Calicut and the Far East, where the ocean holds its breath before releasing it in a fury. The monsoons have begun to stir, and in these waters, so rich with life, trade, and blood, the sky is a god you dare not defy. It is the height of the Portuguese Empire's reach into the Indian Ocean, and with it comes profit and peril. The Dutch press us from the south, biting into our cinnamon roots from Ceylon, and the English have begun sniffing about the Gujarati ports like dogs denied a feast. Yet still, we sail, for the money is in the cargo, not gold, but spices, more precious than silver, more seductive than silk. Nutmeg, cardamom, peppercorns dark as night, and cinnamon, God the cinnamon, sweet and sharp, a scent that clings to your skin even after months at sea. There are men in Lisbon who will kill for a barrel of it. I command a carrack named Santa Rosa, though most of the crew have taken to calling her a Menina do Mar, the girl of the sea. She's a stubborn vessel, fat-bellied with wide hips, but she's carried us through worse waters than these. Or so I believed. We had left the port of Cochin 5 days prior, holds fat with clove and cinnamon, with hopes of reaching Malacca before the worst of the storms. The coast had slipped behind us like a fading memory, and for a time the seas were kind, a deceptive calm, like a lover smiling before a slap. But I should have known. The sky had begun to take on that iron hue, the kind that makes the sea look like beaten pewter, and the air tasted of copper and unease. The birds vanished, not a gull, not a tern, just stillness. Then came the wind. It came without warning, a slap across the sails that sent the masts screaming and the men scrambling. A low groan rose from the ship's belly as she pitched forward. My first mate, João, shouted something I couldn't make out over the rising howl. We were in it now. A storm splits the sky like a blade, and as the spice crates slam against the hull, I wonder which will go overboard first, the cinnamon or the crew. I grip the railing as the world becomes movement, up, down, side to side. Like the sea is trying to throw us off her back. Salt stings my face, and I can taste the storm on my lips. Bitter, electric, lightning cracks so close, I see the bones of the sails illuminated for a second, like a ribcage straining to hold in a scream. Below deck, barrels of spice groan and lurch, their iron bands straining. I can hear the wet thud of cloves sliding, loose and scattering. A crate breaks open near the galley, and cinnamon sticks spill like bones across the planks, clattering, tumbling, slick with seawater. The scent, that glorious, warming scent, rises into the madness like incense from a cathedral burning. We are pitched again, the port side rising high, before slamming down into the trough with a crash that rattles my teeth. One of the younger sailors, barely 16 and still soft in the face, screams as he's thrown against the capstan. Blood smears the wood. He doesn't rise. João and I lock eyes. He doesn't speak, but I see the question there. Do we jettison the cargo? I shake my head. Not yet. The storm has teeth, but so do I. These spices are our lives, our future. They are worth more than the hull that carries them. And yet I know deep in my bones, the ocean cares nothing for our ambitions. The sea has swallowed entire fleets for less. Thunder bellows like cannon fire overhead, and the wind roars in my ears, an angry god demanding tribute. The sails twist and snap like broken wings, and we're flying blind now, every man working by instinct and desperation. Ropes whip across the deck like vipers. Water pours through the seams in the hull, as though the sea itself is crawling in, hungry and relentless. I make my way below to the cargo hold, wading through knee-deep water as spices float past me like offerings, cloves, pepper, strands of saffron that look like blood in the flickering lamplight. A barrel of nutmeg has burst, the scent warm and familiar even here in this drowning tomb. I find a crate teetering on the edge of the hatch. Cinnamon. If it falls, it will take 3 more with it. I brace myself and heave it back, the wood slick and uncooperative. And for a moment, I'm certain I'll be pulled down with it. But I manage to shove it back against the wall just as the ship lurches again and throws me against the beams. Pain explodes in my shoulder. I taste blood. The hold is flooding faster now. The bilge crew is overwhelmed, buckets useless against a tide that cannot be contained. I stumble up the steps, emerging into a world gone mad. Rain lashes the deck, a vertical sheet of water that blinds and deafens. Men cling to anything they can, hands red and raw from the ropes. I see one, Duarte, a strong swimmer, flung overboard like a doll. He disappears in seconds. No one speaks of it. There is no time. Then, a sound, not the storm, not the rain, but something deeper, a groan, a tear, wood screaming, the mainmast. It's going. I scream for the men to clear. The deck just as it cracks and falls, 1,000 pounds of timber crashing down with a sound like the world ending. The mast crushes the longboat and splits the deck rail, and in its wake, another crate of cinnamon, my last sealed barrel, tumbles into the sea, vanishing into the black. I watch it go, heart sinking with it. When morning comes, the sea is calm again, as if nothing had happened. The sun rises red and indifferent, casting golden light over the wreckage. We are afloat, somehow. Barely. The Santa Rosa is crippled, the sails torn, the mast broken, the deck scarred with debris and blood. We've lost 2 men. 6 more are injured. The crew is exhausted, silent, every one of them hollow-eyed and soaked to the marrow. But we are alive, and in the hold, enough cargo remains to call it salvage. I walk the deck as the sun warms my face, the scent of soaked spice lingering like a benediction. We will make for Ceylon, limping, slow, but still moving. The sea has taken her share and spared the rest. It is not mercy, it is a warning. Out here, the ocean does not forgive. It remembers, and so do I. I am a spice trader. I have risked death for scent and flavor, for coins minted in empires I will never see again. But out here, it is not empire that rules, not kings, not gods, only the wind, the salt, and the sea, and they do not trade in mercy. The Golden Smile. July 1622. Zanzibar Archipelago, Eastern African coast. Zanzibar always smelled of heat and cloves. The air was thick with it, richer than anything I'd known in Lisbon or Goa, a pungent, sweet-spiced haze that clung to everything. The harbour here was a chaotic paradise, where traders shouted in Swahili, Arabic, and Portuguese, where the scent of roasting goat mingled with the salt of the sea and the perfume of dried blossoms. Women in bright kiting wraps balanced baskets on their heads as deftly as dancers, and the market swelled with colours. Saffron yellows, tamarind reds, the glossy black of fermented vanilla beans. But it was always the cloves that mattered. Most Zanzibar was the heart of that trade, the beating, bloody heart. Whole villages inland grew nothing else. And there, in the souk's shaded corners, beneath tarps fluttering like sails, deals were made that could change a man's life, or end it. We had arrived days ago, anchoring the Santa Rosa just beyond. The coral reef, her hull still scarred from the storm, but her pride intact. The crew was restless, too long at sea, too many nights watching each other's backs. But we still had business. A cargo hold nearly emptied by the monsoon now needed to be filled again, and we needed coin. Always, it came down to that. Had just signed off on a shipment of green cloves, barely dried, still sharp enough to sting your nose. They'd cost me half what they would in Ceylon, and would fetch triple that in the Gulf, if the winds were kind. The crates were being loaded under the watchful eye of João, who'd taken to chewing betel nut like the locals, his mouth red and his teeth stained like old teak. I stood at the edge of the dock, ledger in hand, watching the chaos of the harbour as dhows bobbed in the tide and boys dove into the sea, chasing coins tossed by bored sailors. That's when I saw him. A man with gold teeth. He stepped off a dhow that hadn't been there moments before, quiet as a whisper, and moved through the market like he already owned it. His robes were fine, but unremarkable. Indigo cotton with silver embroidery, slightly frayed at the cuffs, but his boots were out of place, made from Italian leather, black as sin and polished to a mirror shine. His skin was dark, his face narrow, but his eyes, they were unreadable, like deep water. And when he smiled, those teeth flashed like doubloons in the sun. He walked straight to me, no hesitation, no introduction. "How much for the cloves?" he asked, in a voice smooth as oiled silk. I gave him the standard rate, a fair one for Zanzibar, one we quoted to locals and foreign captains alike. He didn't blink. "I'll pay double," he said. No questions, no haggling. João looked up from the gangplank, brows raised. Double. In all my years trading, I'd never heard that. The spice trade was built on haggling, on weeks of drawn-out offers, on men slicing each other down to the last coin. No one offered double, not unless they had reason. I studied him then, properly. His hands were ink-stained, not the filth of labour, but the ink of contracts, of ledgers, of things written in languages meant not to be read. His left thumb bore a deep groove from a blade, long-heeled, and there was a bulge beneath his robes, a pistol most likely, or a dagger. He noticed my gaze and smiled wider. Gold again. I considered the offer. The ship needed repairs, the crew needed pay, and spice didn't last long in this heat. Mould crept in when you weren't looking. It was a risk either way. "We'll take it," I said finally. "But the cargo stays aboard until the coin is in our hands." He nodded once, and without ceremony, produced a velvet pouch from beneath his sash, heavy, dark red, and tied with a ribbon I recognized as Ottoman. He handed it to me, and it clinked in that satisfying way only real gold ever does. I weighed it in my palm, opened the drawstring, and there it was. Portuguese cruzados, minted in Lisbon. New, unworn. That's what truly unsettled me. These coins hadn't passed through many hands. They were fresh from the press, which meant he had a supply, or access to someone who did. He turned on his heel and walked back, down the dock as the crew, confused but grateful, secured the deal. I watched him vanish into the crowd. No name, no questions, no receipt. That night, we loaded his cargo onto a smaller boat tethered to the Santa Rosa under cover of dark. 6 crates of cloves, enough to perfume a city. He came alone, and he left alone, the small sailboat vanishing into the starless sea like a shadow-swallowed whole. João and I stood at the rail, watching the last of his sail disappear. "What do you think?" he asked, chewing his betel nut, slowly. "I think," I replied, "we just sold cloves to a ghost." But even as I said it, I checked the deck, and the rails, and the crates. Every sound made me flinch. Every creak of timber felt like a dagger at my back. We took his coin. How could we not? But we didn't sleep easy that night. Not even the scent of cloves, thick in our cabin like incense, could drown the smell of trouble. You don't trust a man who offers twice the price, especially not in Zanzibar. The Sea That Whispers. August, 1622, off the coast of Madagascar. We sighted her just after dawn. A pale ship against a pale sky, masts tall and rigid, sails straining with wind, but no crew to man her. She moved with unnatural grace, as if drawn by some unseen current, gliding across the sea like a ghost skating across a mirror. The lookout shouted first, voice sharp with confusion more than alarm. By the time I reached the deck, spyglass in hand, the entire crew had gone silent. She was a galleon, not Portuguese, nor Dutch. Her hull was weathered grey, barnacle-bitten and sun-bleached, but her sails were impossibly white, like bone against the horizon. No flag flew from her mast, no movement stirred upon her deck, not a soul to be seen. And yet she sailed on, as steady and full of purpose as any manned vessel. As she passed to our starboard side, the wind shifted, and that's when we smelled it. Nutmeg and something else. It hit us like a wave, a sickly sweetness that curled at the edges, clinging to the nose like syrup turned sour. The unmistakable perfume of nutmeg pods, split open and overripe, mingled with the fetid reek of rot. It was the scent of a harvest gone wrong. I could almost see the spice. Burlap sacks bursting in the sun, hull planks swelling with mould, 1,000 pounds of fragrant decay trapped below decks. The men covered their noses with sleeves and sashes, but the stench seemed to cling to the air itself. "She's cursed," someone muttered behind me. I didn't turn. "She's empty," I said aloud. "Abandoned, maybe, storm-tossed, a derelict." But the words felt thin in my mouth. I'd seen plenty of abandoned ships. This was something else. The navigator joined me at the rail, his face lined with sun and salt and the quiet, stubborn dread of a man who knows when nature has stopped obeying its own rules. He stared at the galleon without speaking, fingers twitching on the edge of his sextant. Then, without taking his eyes from the ship, he said it. "The monsoon winds are late." The words were a whisper, nearly lost beneath the flapping of sails and the creak of the hull. But I heard them, and so did the crew. Around me, men stiffened. João spat into the sea and crossed himself. One of the deckhands began murmuring, something in Malayalam under his breath, words meant for gods with too many arms and too little mercy. The monsoon was our lifeline. We were supposed to ride it northward, toward Muscat and the Red Sea, where our pepper would trade for incense and gold, maybe even silks if we were clever. But the wind that should have filled our sails with roaring certainty had turned hesitant, fickle. It had been days of tacking, of sudden lulls and strange currents. The sky held no storms, but no blessings either, just an eerie grey that never quite broke into rain or sun. "Perhaps the winds are waiting," I said, too loud. "For what?" asked João. "Permission." The crew laughed, thin, nervous, a hollow sort of sound. That night, no one sang. Usually, the men would pass the evening chewing dried mango and playing dice, telling lies about women and spice fortunes. But now they sat quietly, polishing tools that didn't need polishing, watching the sea as if it might reach up and take them. I retired to my quarters, but I did not sleep. The smell lingered, despite the distance between us and that ghost ship. Nutmeg and death. I tried to write in my ledger, to mark our course and account for our cargo. Sacks of Malabar pepper, black as ink and just as valuable. but my hand trembled slightly with each line. Somewhere in the hold, a crate had split. I could hear it. The soft rattle of loose peppercorns shifting with the waves, like bones in a bag. By morning, the sails above us hung limp again, no wind. Just the sun burning white on the water and the endless creaking of a ship waiting for purpose. The men blamed the gods. They always do when things go wrong. The Indian Ocean is old, older than any chart or chronicle, and it has never taken kindly to arrogance. The Swahili sailors whisper to the wind before they launch. The Omanis bring charms of coral and silver to ward off storms. Even the Jesuits keep quiet when the sea starts to hum. Me, I don't believe in sea gods. I believe in rot. I believe in trade routes and mold and the inevitable way spices spoil when you linger too long in waters that don't want you. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't listen differently now. To the sound of the sea, the creak of the mast, the hush of the waves licking against the hull, like a tongue tasting something foreign. That ghost ship still haunts us. It didn't vanish. Not really. I see it in the mist some mornings, off the port or the stern, just beyond what's reasonable. The crew doesn't say it, but I know they see it too. A shape, a shadow, a memory drifting alongside us. They've stopped calling it the ghost ship. Now they call it the mirror, and in our pepper-stained wake, the sea grows quiet, too quiet. We wait for the wind, and we pray, not just for direction, but for forgiveness. The map beneath the turban. March 1622, the Laccadive Sea, aboard the Iram of Malabar. It began with a fight. Two sailors, a Goan and a Makrani, wrestling like drunken oxen on the lower deck, fists flying, curses in 4 languages. I arrived, just as the older one, Kamis, was on the verge of tossing the younger overboard, holding him by the collar and the edge of a coil of rope. The younger man, Rafik, spat blood and defiance, screaming that Kamis had stolen from him, a lie. Or so we thought at first. Sailors steal from each other like the sea steals from the shore, slowly, endlessly, and with no apology. But this theft was different. When the fight broke apart and the men were hauled before me, the evidence came in the form of a bundle of cloth, an indigo turban, thickly wound and heavily embroidered. Kamis had taken it from a dead merchant in Kochi, or so he claimed. Mughal, from the north. Wealthy. The kind who wore coin-stitched sashes and smelled of rosewater and arrogance. I was just checking the seams for gold, Kamis said, not even ashamed. Instead, he found thread. Not gold, not gems. Thread. Red, nearly invisible to the eye unless you knew to look for it, but stitched not in floral loops or paisleys. No, stitched in angles and curves. Tiny, hidden lines across the inner folds. A pattern, a code, a map. I remember that moment so clearly. How the ship swayed, how the light from the oil lamp danced across the silk as I held it. My fingers traced the threads, a curving route through familiar aisles, past known trade cities. Then, a deviation, a twist westward, away from the busy ports and into a void of chartless water. There, stitched in the margin, Al-Karhan, where saffron blooms beneath black glass and smoke sings in the blood. It meant nothing, and it meant everything. Rafik, his mouth still bleeding, swore he had seen the name once before, carved into a stone block behind a spice stall in Bandar Abbas. Said it was cursed. Said men who went there came back rich, or didn't come back at all. He whispered of an island port hidden behind monsoon fogs, accessible only during a single moontide, where forbidden saffron grew in crimson fields tended by eunuch monks, and where opium more potent than Persian black was distilled drop by drop into mother-of-pearl vials. I should have tossed the turban into the sea, but I didn't. Greed is a sailor's oldest sin, older than thirst, older than fear. That night, I locked the turban in my chest and sent word to the navigator. "Plot a new heading," I said. "We'll chase a ghost." The crew caught wind of it before long. You can't hide a thing like that aboard a ship. Secrets bloom in salt air like mold on fruit. The older men warned me softly, not outright. No port without a name stays nameless without reason, Juo muttered, fingering the rosary he never wore above deck. The Tamil cook refused to prepare turmeric for 2 days, muttering prayers under his breath and scraping his knives against a whetstone until the steel sang. Even the winds changed. They blew too hard, then not at all. Squalls passed without warning, lightning crackling across a sky that was otherwise clear. Once, we found a flying fish dead on the deck, its body split cleanly in two, as though cut by an invisible blade. And still. I pressed on, days blurred. We passed known ports, Kalpitia, Gala, the southern curve of Lanka, but did not stop. We rationed cloves and dates, drank rainwater caught in tarpaulins, and sharpened our senses against the creeping unease that had begun to haunt the ship. Then, it appeared, a sliver of land at dusk, veiled in mist, not on any chart, not marked by coral shoals or signal fires. The smell of saffron drifted before we saw the harbour itself, a quiet inlet walled by basalt cliffs, black as ink. No lanterns, no guards, just a jetty of dark stone stretching into the sea. And at its end, men, or something like them, figures in robes that shimmered like oil, silent, still, waiting. We dropped anchor with no wind in our sails, as if some greater breath held us steady. I did not take the full crew ashore, only 3 men and Rafiq, who would not be denied. We rowed in silence, the water thick and unnaturally still. As we stepped onto the jetty, one of the robed figures raised a hand, not in greeting, but in warning. The air was strange on that island, sweet, heavy. It smelled of saffron, real saffron, not the spiced copies from Anatolia or the powder the Dutch mix with sandalwood, the real thing, alive with pungent gold, and behind it, smoke, not wood smoke, not incense, something bitter, cloying. The scent of a drug that does not simply dull pain, but shows you the shape of it. I felt it in my bones. We were led down a pathway carved between basalt cliffs, lit by no torches. We walked for what felt like hours, until the sound of the sea was gone, and all that remained was the soft rustling of spice pods drying in nets, and the low hum of chanting. Voices that sang in no tongue I knew. We saw no markets, no silver scales, no hagglers shouting weights, only trades. A sailor offered up a gold ring. They gave him a vial of black liquid that steamed in his palm. Another showed them a tattoo. They nodded and handed him a sealed pouch of red powder. No words, no coin, no bartering. I had brought cloves, a crate of our finest, sun-dried in Cochin. I placed it before them. One of the figures stepped forward, cut the top with a blade of bone, and dipped a hand in. He raised a clove to his lips, and bit. He smiled. Then he turned, and from a hollow behind the basalt wall, he drew forth a tiny jar, the size of a thumb. Inside, saffron, threads so red they shimmered, glowing. I took it, and I left the island without a word. Back aboard the Aram of Malabar, no one asked what I had traded. No one asked where the saffron came from. We sailed north in silence, and no man mentioned the island again. But sometimes, at night, Rafiq wakes screaming. He says the figures followed us, that they whisper through the waves, that the map stitched, in that turban was never meant to be found, and that the smoke we smelled on that cursed island wasn't from opium or spice, but from something still burning, something that remembers us. Blood in the Strait, May 1622, the Strait of Malacca, aboard the Aram of Malabar. There are places on the sea where the wind itself seems to hold its breath, where even the gulls are quiet, and the water beneath your hull ripples not from current or tide, but from something deeper, older. The Strait of Malacca is one of those places. a narrow bottleneck between Sumatra and the Malay Peninsula, flanked by jungle and shadow, where riches move in convoys and death drifts just beneath the surface. It is the most dangerous passage in the Indies, and we sailed into it with cloves in the hold, pepper in the barrels, and saffron sealed in a jar no man dared to touch. I should have waited for an escort. Dutch ships often pair off through the strait, watching each other like suspicious brothers. But we had lingered too long in Archer, and the wind favoured us. The tide pulled like a hand, and fortune had smiled on us too many times already. So we sailed alone. The first sign came at dawn, the sea suddenly too calm, the sky heavy with a ceiling of bruised grey clouds. My navigator squinted through his eyeglass and muttered, "No birds today." He was right. No sea swallows, no gliders. Just open water and the eerie hush of something not yet begun. We spotted the sails an hour later, 3 of them. Low, fast-moving, slipping between the reefs with ease. Malay design, shallow draft craft made for rivers and raiding. The sort you could beach and vanish with in minutes. We tried to outrun them. Full canvas, every stitch of sail caught the wind, and the Irem surged forward like a warhorse. But it wasn't enough. They knew these waters like a butcher knows his blade. They gained on us steadily, drawing close by mid-morning. Black hulls painted, with jagged teeth, flags fluttering not with skulls, but with snakes. We armed what few we could, cutlasses, pikes, even a musket or two. Juome lit the swivel gun on the stern, its iron mouth ready, but it was a bluff. We had only 2 charges left, and they knew it. You can always tell the difference between a merchant vessel and a warship. By the way she panics, they were on us before noon. The pirates didn't shout. They didn't announce. They came like wind through reeds, ropes thrown, grappling hooks biting into our rail. One leapt the gap and landed cleanly on our deck, barefoot and smiling. Tattoos coiled up his arms. His teeth were black from betel nut. He raised a hand, not in threat but in command. And suddenly, we were surrounded. 10, maybe 12 of them. No armour, no uniforms, just blades and calm confidence. "Your cargo," one said in Portuguese. "No blood if you give it freely." I stepped forward. My hand did not shake. I've seen men killed for less than pepper, and I knew that pride was a poor shield. "Take what you want," I said, "but no harm to my crew." They nodded. 2 of them moved below decks, and then chaos. The sound of shouting, steel against steel. I turned and saw him, Malik, our youngest sailor, a lad from Gujarat, barely 20, thin as a spar, but brave to the point of foolishness. He'd served on a coastal patrol boat before joining us, hated pirates with a fire I never understood, said they killed his brother in sight of his village. Perhaps they had, but this was not a battle to win. He rushed them with a boarding axe, screaming a name I didn't know. He cut one down before the others moved. The pirate's blood sprayed across the deck, a shocking arc of red in the sun, and just like that, the spell was broken. They didn't shout, they didn't hesitate. 3 blades pierced Malik at once, chest, gut, throat. He dropped the axe. His mouth opened, but no sound came. He crumpled beside the mainmast, and the pirate stepped over his body as if he were driftwood. The leader looked at me then, and for a moment I feared the worst. But he only said, "This is why we don't. Ask nicely." They took 2 crates of cloves, 1 barrel of cinnamon, and half our tobacco. Left the saffron. Too suspicious. They took nothing else. No killing, no rape, no destruction. Just that one boy. As they shoved off, the leader turned back. He died clean. Better than most. I said nothing. After they vanished into the horizon, I ordered the crew to prepare Malik's body. We wrapped him in sailcloth, tied with hemp, weighted with iron. We gave him no fire, no grand prayer, only salt water and silence. I was the one to push him over the side. The splash echoed off the strait's walls like a drumbeat. The men didn't speak for the rest of the day. That night, The sea was flat as obsidian. No wind, no sound but the creak of the mast and the soft groan of wood. I stood alone by the railing, staring out at the water, trying to trace the direction those pirates had come from, wondering how many merchant ships had given them coin and blood, just the same. And I thought of Malik, his fire, his rage, his impossible courage. He had died like a hero in a world that had no room for them. And the strait, it just kept on flowing. The island that bled the wind. September 1622, a nameless isle south of Ceylon. We spotted it just before dawn, a smudge on the horizon, low and long, like the back of some drowned beast. No flags, no smoke, no signs of life. But the water around it was calm, too calm, as though the sea itself hesitated before touching its shores. It wasn't on any of our maps. We had been pushed far off course by a squall 2 nights prior. Sails, ragged, rations stretched thin, and the crew near mad with the sweat-heavy stillness of the doldrums. So when we saw the island, rising out of the sea like some secret, the temptation was too strong. We needed water, firewood, a moment of earth beneath our feet. We should have kept sailing. From the moment we dropped anchor in the shallows, something was wrong. It was the smell. The air hung thick and metallic, not like fish rot or swamp gas. No, it was sharper, copper sweet, like a butcher's apron left too long in the sun. The closer we rowed to shore, the heavier it got, until it coated our tongues like oil and made our noses twitch with an animal sort of warning. The beach was lined with coral, red, pink, and strangely brittle beneath our boots. Beyond that, a jungle, lush and choked with vines, trees heavy with fruit we didn't recognize. No birds, no monkeys, no sound except the tide and the shifting of leaves. We should have turned back then, but thirst makes fools of men. We fanned out in twos. Quartermaster took 5 men inland to search for fresh water. I stayed close to the landing party, organizing crates for barter in case any islanders came forward. They never did. We found huts, maybe a dozen, tucked in a clearing not far from the beach, built from palm, reed, and volcanic stone. The kind you see in fishing villages, though there were no nets, no boats, no tools, no people. But there were signs of them, scattered, belongings, wooden bowls, jewelry made of bone and glass, a carved flute, still humming slightly from the breeze that passed through its hollow, all of it abandoned in a way that felt sudden, like someone had rung a bell none of us could hear. And then we saw the pit, at the center of the village, rough-hewn, lined with obsidian shards, maybe 6 feet wide, and deep, so deep we couldn't see the bottom, just darkness, and the smell. My God, the smell poured from that hole like it was bleeding into the air. The blood smell, that thick, cloying taste of iron and rot. One of the crew dropped a pebble in. We never heard it land. The navigator muttered, "This place is wrong." He was right. That night we camped on the beach, foolishly believing the shore would be safer. We lit no fires. No one spoke. Even the wind was silent, and the waves lapped the sand as though afraid to make noise. I dreamt of drums, of things in the trees with hands like sea fans and faces like carved masks, moving without sound. I woke drenched in sweat, the child stowaway sitting at my feet, eyes wide, talisman clutched to his chest. He simply whispered, "Don't dig." I hadn't told him about the pit. We left at dawn, no water, no food, just the smoke of unease trailing us back to the sea. The men didn't speak for hours. A heaviness hung over the deck, as if the ship itself had inhaled the island's breath and now carried it in her belly. 3 days later, one of the men who ventured inland began to bleed from his eyes. He died before nightfall. By the next sunrise, 2 more had fevers so violent they tore at their own skin, muttering words none of us understood. We buried them at sea, prayers caught in our throats like thorns. We don't speak of the island now. not openly. But I see it in the way the men glance over their shoulders, in the salt circles some of them carve into the planks of their bunks, in the offerings of clove and rum left beside the cinnamon hold, where the child sleeps, still silent, still watching. Whatever that island was, it didn't want us there, and some part of it came with us anyway. The Scrolls of the Unspeakable Tongue. October 1622. 3 weeks west of Sumatra, deep in the Banda Sea. We were restocking the aft hold after a morning of rough swell, just another dull task in the rhythm of ship life. Shifting crates, checking for sea rot, cursing the rats that chewed through the burlap sacks. The crew worked with the slow resignation of men who had seen too many weeks of horizon. Salt had stiffened our clothes. Spice dust clung to every corner of the hold. Clove, pepper, anise, a heady perfume that soaked into your skin and made the world feel rich even as we starved for fresh water and clear skies. That's when we found it. I had just pried open a crate marked with the usual merchant stamp, a black circle enclosing a single 8-pointed star. We'd picked it up in a port off Borneo, part of a rushed trade deal after a monsoon blew our schedule sideways. The broker was hasty, red-eyed, muttering about tides and temple curses, eager to be rid of the goods. I should have known then. The lid came off with a groan of wet wood, the nails pulling loose like teeth. No star anise inside, just scrolls, dozens of them, rolled tight, bound with thin black twine, wrapped in layers of silk that had once been white, now the colour of old bone. The air changed the moment I unwrapped the first one. The hold, already dark, seemed to contract, the way a room does, just before a storm hits. The scent, once full of spice and salt, took on something sour, like dry parchment soaked in seawater and left to bake. I held one scroll up to the lantern. The parchment was delicate, older than anything I'd ever seen on this route. Faint, impossibly fine lettering coiled across it, not written, but etched, like the language had burned itself into the material. The symbols twisted in ways that felt unnatural, loops within loops, lines that doubled back like snakes devouring their own tails. I showed it to the navigator. He looked for 1 second, then shut his eyes and said, "Put it back." I didn't. Instead, I took it topside. I wanted fresh light, to see it clearly, to make sense of it. But the moment sunlight touched the scroll, the ink shimmered. Not gold, not silver, something else, an oily sheen that shifted in colour each time you blinked. The text moved. Not metaphorically. It writhed. Then came the whisper. A voice, no louder than a breath, brushing the edge of my hearing. It wasn't outside me. It was inside my skull, brushing against the soft tissue of thought like a moth's wing. I dropped the scroll immediately. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Even now, weeks later, I feel that tremor when I think too long about the glyphs. We tried to burn them. That was the quartermaster's idea. He doused the scrolls in lamp oil and set a torch to them. The fire flared hot, too hot, and then snuffed out as if swallowed. No smoke, no ash. The scrolls sat there, unmarked. That night, he went overboard. No splash, no scream, just gone. Since then, none of us have touched the crate. We resealed it, roped it tight, and marked it with pitch. But it hums now, at night. A low sound like wind through iron chimes, except there is no wind in the lower hold. The men who sleep near it have taken to chanting little prayers before bed. Not to the sea gods, not to any god I know, old prayers. Forgotten ones. I hear the stowaway child whisper them in the dark, clutching his sandalwood talisman. One of the scrolls is missing. No one admits to taking it, but I've seen a look in the carpenter's eye, like he hasn't slept, like he knows things he shouldn't. He draws strange shapes in the condensation on the rails. I found one etched into the hull with a fish knife. When I asked him about it, He only smiled and said, "The sea has a deeper memory than we do. I've locked the crate in the salt locker now, behind iron and prayer. But the ship feels colder since we opened it, like something woke up when we broke that seal. Something old, something that doesn't care for maps or time or language spoken aloud. We sail faster now. The wind has returned, not from the west as expected, but from the deep south, where the charts show nothing but open water and stories no sailor dares record. But the scrolls are here with us, just beneath the spice, and I think they are waiting for something or someone." The Fog That Dreamed. November 1622, somewhere between the Cocos and the Andamans. It arrived with no warning. The sea was calm, a rare mercy. For 2 straight days we'd made good time, the wind steady, the hull dry. There was even laughter again, soft and weary, but laughter nonetheless. The cook had found a small sack of tamarind buried under sacks of pepper and boiled it into a bitter tea that, for a moment, reminded us of home, whatever corner of the world that meant for each of us. Then came the fog. It crept across the water in a long, low crawl, not from the sky, but from the sea itself, as though the ocean exhaled it. At first we mistook it for morning haze. The sun had not yet risen, and mist is no stranger in these waters. But this was not mist. This fog was too dense, too still. It swallowed light, muffled sound, and carried with it a smell none of us could place. Not rot, not brine, but something older, like old incense and charred parchment. We lit the lanterns early. Their glow barely pushed the darkness back. By midday, we could no longer see the water over the sides, just a wall of grey. The sails hung limp. The wind had abandoned us, and that's when the dreams began. The first was Haroun, the helmsman, a mountain of a man, hard as teak and twice as steady. That night, I found him on deck, staring at the sky with tears in his eyes. "I saw it," he whispered, "a temple made of bone and brass, fire coming from the spires, and blood in the sea, so much blood. It wasn't a dream." I dismissed it. Heatstroke, maybe. Bad fish. But then others followed. By the next morning, 6 men reported similar dreams. Fire, temples, oceans turned red, ships burning on silent waves. One man woke screaming, clutching his own throat as though he were drowning. Another wouldn't stop, scratching at his palms. He said the stone from the temple had left sand in his skin. The fog never lifted. Days passed. Or maybe it was one long night. The sky stayed the same, ash-coloured and low. No stars. No sun. Time became an idea we no longer trusted. Watches ran fast. Bells were rung off time. The compass spun in slow, uncertain loops. I dreamed too. Not sleep. Not really. More like falling. I stood in a corridor of red stone, the walls pulsing like a heartbeat. A child walked ahead of me, barefoot, dragging a chain made of teeth. The air burned with the scent of saffron and ash. And on the walls, carvings, in that same language from the scrolls, coiling and shifting like worms beneath skin. I couldn't read them, but I understood them. Somehow. Sacrifice. Fire. Memory buried in salt. I woke choking on my own breath. My clothes were damp. Not with sweat, but seawater. My hands were wrinkled as though I'd been submerged. The men had stopped speaking. They moved slow, eyes red-rimmed and distant. Some stood for hours staring over the rail, lips moving in silent prayer, or names I didn't recognize. One man, Thomas, the barrelman, climbed the rigging and refused to come down. He sat in the crow's nest, laughing. "The fog is a veil," he said, "and we're the offering." He jumped. The water didn't splash. We tried to sail out of it. We set every sail, pulled every line. No matter which course we plotted, west toward Ceylon, east toward Malacca, the fog held us like a hand. The stars did not return, nor did the wind. The child, the stowaway, hasn't spoken since the fog came. but he carved something into the mast with a broken spoon. I found it yesterday. Not a word. A map, maybe. A spiral, tight and endless. Around it, tiny figures, kneeling, worshipping. Last night, every man aboard had the same dream. Fire, a stone altar, and a voice, not loud but deep, echoing inside our skulls like thunder in a cave. You were never meant to pass unnoticed. I don't know what it means, but I feel it, deep in my bones, like a storm waiting just beyond the horizon. This morning, the fog shifted. Not cleared, just moved. A shape passed through it. A ship, or the ghost of one. It bore no sails, no name, only a broken mast and a hull streaked black like charred wood. A figure stood at the bow, cloaked in shadow, watching us, not moving. The fog closed again. We no longer mark time. The logbook lies open, pages blank. No one writes anymore. What is there to record when we drift through dreams made flesh? If this entry is found, if any of this reaches land, know that there is something in the water that remembers, and it dreams just as we do. Only its dreams do not end when we wake. The Village That Wasn't. February 1623, somewhere south of Nicobar. The sea turned green 3 days before we found it. A strange colour, not the sparkling jade of shallow reefs or the angry churn of storms, but a milky, sickly green, like something blooming beneath the surface that ought never have been disturbed. The crew grew restless. Even the birds abandoned us. I remember looking up and noticing how quiet the sky was. No gulls, no sails, just the creaking of our masts and the wheeze of rope pulled taut. We had been low on water and needed a port. Not a major harbour, something small, isolated, where our presence wouldn't invite taxes, questions, or colonial eyes. That's when Arjan, our second mate, pointed toward a thin smear of smoke rising on the horizon. It didn't show on our maps. None of them. Still, we changed course. We reached the village by midday. It was tucked along a crescent-shaped inlet of white sand and black volcanic stone. The huts were thatched in woven palm, set high on stilts, as if expecting the sea to rise at any moment and swallow the land whole. Children ran barefoot along the docks. Fishermen pulled nets heavy with silver fish from dugouts that looked carved, by hand, without nail or join. But the strangest thing, and I'll never forget this, was the silence. Not absence of sound, but the reverence of it. No one called out, no haggling, no shouting, no dogs. Even the wind seemed hushed, as if the very air feared being loud. And yet they welcomed us. A woman with silver in her hair and gold across her eyes, I never learned her name, greeted us with a nod. No smile, no warmth. But she pointed to our crates and then to a basket of pearls, smooth and pale as bone. One glance, and I knew they were real. Saltwater pearls that could fetch 20 times their worth in the right market. She wanted nutmeg, nothing else. 3 crates, she said. Her voice sounded as if it had travelled a long way to reach her mouth. Hollow. Measured. I agreed without hesitation. We offloaded the spice, received the pearls, and drank their rice liquor under the shade of blood-red parasols. A few of the men wandered the village. They returned later, uneasy, said the houses were filled with idols. Tall, faceless effigies made of bone and driftwood, with strings of shark teeth around their necks and eyes carved as perfect circles. One claimed he saw a shrine half buried in the jungle behind the village, where the trees grew in unnatural spirals, twisting toward the sky like smoke. But the people did us no harm. They nodded. They stared. And when we left, they stood in a line along the shore, unmoving, watching as we pulled anchor. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt watched. Weeks passed. We sailed east, sold our pearls in Batavia for a chest of silver, and returned west with salted fish, dried citrus, and new sails from Ceylon. That's when I suggested we return. The spices we left had cost us next to nothing. If we could secure more pearls, we could triple our profits. It was greed, I know that now. We followed the same stars, the same tide. But something had shifted. The sea was grey now, dull and flat, like pewter. The beach was still there, but the trees along the shore were wrong. Leafless, blackened. The same crescent of sand, but no smoke, no voices, no children. We rowed ashore and found the huts abandoned. Most had been torn apart, as if by claws or wind, but there had been no storm, no footprints, no sign of life, just silence and flies. Then we found the well. It had been covered with a stone slab, heavy and carved with that same perfect circle I remembered seeing in the idols, but someone had pushed it aside. The rope hung loose. I tied it around my waist and descended, torch in hand. What I saw below will follow me to my grave. At the bottom were bones, hundreds, maybe more, skulls stacked in rings, each with a hole, bored clean through the forehead, ritualistic, deliberate. Among them, a small figure, cradled in rotting silk, with pearls sewn into her skin. Her mouth was open, and inside it, a seed of nutmeg. I scrambled up, heart hammering, bile in my throat. When I emerged, the crew had gone quiet. Ariane pointed toward the trees. Hanging from the branches, strung by their feet, were what remained of the villagers. All of them, skin grey, eyes gone. Each body marked with the same circular sigil, carved, not painted. Something had happened here. Not war, not plague. Something older, hungrier. We did not speak. We returned to the ship and sailed without raising anchor. I threw the last of our pearls into the sea that night, watched them vanish into the black. I prayed, not to any God I knew, but to the sea itself, that it might forget us, that it might forget we had ever been there. Because now, sometimes, when the stars are low and the sea is still, I dream of a circle of stone and sand, and a woman with gold eyes, standing barefoot on the shore, whispering, in a tongue the wind will not carry, and in her hands she holds another pearl, one with my name on it. The Musk-Laden Challenge. June, 1617. The coral reefs off the coast of Sumatra. The sun had just begun its slow crawl toward the horizon, casting a molten gold sheen across the restless waters of the Indian Ocean. Our ship, the Sundari, rocked gently in the afternoon's swell, her decks alive with the creak of rigging and the salty tang of sea spray. We were laden with crates of clove and mace, bound for the bustling ports of Gujarat, but the day had other plans. From the eastern horizon, a shape emerged, cutting the waves like a shadow. A rival ship, its sails full and proud, came closer, with a strange aroma trailing behind, heavy, almost cloying. Musk. The air itself seemed thickened by it, as if the sea had been infused with the scent of wild animals and burnt amber. Our captain narrowed his eyes, and I felt the tension ripple through our crew. The other ship drew alongside us, the rival trader, a stout man with a beard flecked by salt and gold teeth flashing as he smiled, called across the water. You carry spices, yes? But we carry the scent of kings, musk for the courts of Persia, worth more than your clove. Let us race through the reefs by Pulaway. Winner takes all, a race. The challenge was madness. The reefs were a tangled labyrinth of coral teeth, sharp enough to tear a ship's belly open and spill her into the sea. Many a seasoned captain would have balked, but pride and the promise of riches won over caution. Our captain's voice was steady. We accept. The crews scrambled. Sailors shouted orders, pulling ropes and adjusting sails, the decks alive with urgency. The musk-laden ship pressed ahead, confident in her bulk, but slow to turn. We danced on the wind, lighter and swifter. I stood by the bow, eyes darting to the jagged coral lurking beneath the turquoise water. The reefs like the spines of some great sea beast, waiting to strike. The race was a test of nerve and skill. Our helmsman guided the Sundari through narrow channels where the coral scraped our hull like a razor. The musk ship lumbered behind, slower but unyielding. At one point, the rival's ship scraped a reef so hard that the crew gasped. A splintering crack echoed above the roar of the waves. I could smell the musk growing stronger as we pressed forward, a reminder that the man was gambling everything on this contest. The sea seemed to hold its breath, the usual calls of gulls and crash of waves silenced beneath the tension. The final stretch was the narrowest, a tight bend through reefs that few dared to navigate. Our helmsman shouted warnings, eyes fixed on the shimmering coral gardens beneath. The Sundari leaned hard, sails billowing, keel cutting close to the jagged edges. For a moment, I thought we would lose it all to the reefs. But the ship obeyed, the wind and wood like a living thing. We burst through the bend first, the rival ship just behind, its sails snapping in frustration. The shoreline neared, and the merchant with the gold teeth called out, his voice laced with grudging respect. "You have bested me, spice trader." We dropped anchor in the shallow bay, the musk-laden ship trailing behind. The prize was ours, the cargo of musk and clove, worth more than any of us dared hope. But as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the reefs, I could still smell the musk heavy in the air. A reminder that in this ocean of trade and treachery, fortune was always a race against the tide. Too much clove spoils the soul. Calicut, 1621, the spice market at dusk. The sun had slipped behind the horizon, leaving the sky a wash of deep indigo and the air heavy with the mingled scents of salt, earth, and spice. The bustling market of Calicut was winding down, lanterns flickering like fireflies along narrow alleyways, stacked high with sacks of pepper, cinnamon, and clove. My ship had just returned from the Moluccas, the fabled Spice Islands, her holds bursting with the sharp, aromatic treasures of the archipelago. I was wandering the market's edges when I saw him, an old trader, bent and weathered, his skin creased by decades of sun and sea, his eyes, sharp and clouded like stormy skies, fixed on me as I passed. "Too much clove spoils the soul," he said, voice rough but steady. I stopped, intrigued. "What do you mean?" He smiled, a grim curve of lips. "Clove is a gift, fiery, intoxicating, powerful. But too much and it becomes a poison, drowning the spirit in sweetness that suffocates rather than sustains. Beware its weight, young trader." I nodded, humoring the old man, but the warning settled deep, like an ember glowing faintly in the dark. That night, as I lay in my cramped quarters aboard the Sundari, the scent of clove was everywhere. Crates lined the hold beneath me, their pungent aroma seeping through the wooden planks, thick and almost overwhelming. Sleep came in fitful waves. Then the dream began. I was buried alive beneath a mountain of clove buds, each one sharp and glittering like tiny black stars, the weight pressed down, crushing. I gasped for air, but the sweetness filled my lungs, sticky and heavy. My skin prickled with the spice's heat, my throat burned with its sharpness. I clawed upward, but the cloves closed over me like a tomb. Voices echoed, distant and muffled, the old trader's warning repeating in my mind like a curse. Too much clove spoils the soul. I struggled, desperate for breath. The cloves filled my mouth, the pungent bitterness choking me. My heart pounded against the crushing weight, each beat slower, fainter. Then, just as darkness closed in, I woke, sweating, gasping, the scent of clove still lingering in the air like a ghost. I sat on the edge of my berth, trembling. The dream was a warning, a reminder that in this trade, greed could suffocate as surely as the spices themselves. From that night forward, I vowed to carry clove with respect, not excess, to balance its fire with the coolness of wisdom. For, in these seas, it is not just the cargo that can drown you, but the desire to possess too much of its sweetness. The Scent of Prophet, Indian Ocean, late 1623. Months at sea. Months. That is how long we had been at sea, the Sundari and her crew locked in the endless embrace of the Indian Ocean. Days melted into nights, and nights blurred into dawns filled with the ceaseless creak of rigging, the slap of waves against the hull, and the ever-present, overwhelming scent that had begun to define us, the scent of spices. At first, it was subtle, a faint waft of clove and cinnamon that teased the air whenever a crate was opened on deck. The spice smelled like promise back then, like wealth, waiting to be claimed from the farthest reaches of the archipelago. It was the breath of exotic lands, the Moluccas, Banda and beyond, places whispered about in ports and marketplaces with reverence and greed. But as the weeks dragged on, the scent did more than linger. It invaded everything. Our clothes, once rough but seaworthy, became stained and infused with the oily dust of mace and the sharp dust of peppercorns crushed beneath the boots of our cargo. The fabric seemed to absorb the spice oils, holding them tight against our skin. By the end of the second month, our shirts, trousers and scarves carried a deep, intoxicating aroma that would not wash away, no matter how many times we scrubbed or boiled them in seawater. And it was not just our clothing. The spice seeped into our skin, working its way into every pore until we smelled not like men, but like the cargo itself, a walking, breathing extension of the trade. Our sweat carried the bitter tang of nutmeg. Our hands bore the sticky residue of candied ginger, and our breath was tinged with the sharpness of crushed cloves. I remember the moment I first realized it. We were midway through the voyage, somewhere near the Maldives, and the sea was calm, glassy beneath a blazing sun. I had come below deck after a long day at the helm, thirsting and weary. I took a deep breath, expecting the usual salty air, but instead, the hold, that confined space packed tight with barrels and crates, greeted me with an overwhelming burst of spice. It was as if the ocean had been replaced by a thick, fragrant fog of cinnamon and pepper. I coughed, surprised by the intensity, and realized then that the spice had become part of us, inseparable from our very bodies. We no longer smelled like men who had endured the sea's hardships. We smelled like Prophet itself. The crew began to joke about it. "We're the walking spice caravan," said Raji, our ship's cook, wiping his hands on his apron. "Soon, the merchants at port will smell us coming before they see us." But there was an edge to the humour, a silent acknowledgement that this transformation marked something deeper. We were no longer simple sailors or traders. We were vessels of wealth, carrying not only goods, but the very essence of commerce, greed, and ambition. The spice was a symbol of power, and it clung to us like a second skin. The effects went beyond the physical. There was a change in how others saw us too. When we docked in distant ports, the local traders and merchants would sniff the air, their eyes narrowing with a mix of respect and wariness. They knew our cargo was valuable, but they also knew that men who carried such wealth were dangerous, prone to desperation and cunning. One evening, as the sun set behind the rim of the world, painting the sky in bruised purples and blood reds, I stood at the ship's prow and looked back over the wake. The ocean stretched out like a dark ribbon, endless and unknowable. Behind us lay a trail of ports visited, deals struck, and dangers faced. Ahead, the promise of fortune and the peril that came with it. I wondered then about the cost of this scent we wore so heavily. The spice was intoxicating, yes, but it was also a chain. It marked us, made us targets for pirates, rival traders, and the unpredictable whims of the sea gods. The more it seeped into us, the harder it became to remember who we had been before this voyage. Men chasing dreams of wealth and adventure, or mere shadows swallowed by the endless chase of profit. At night, when the ship creaked and groaned, beneath the stars, I would lie awake and breathe in the spice-saturated air of my cabin, and think of home. A place far away from the suffocating sweetness that now defined us. But there was no escape. We were bound to the spice, and the spice was bound to the sea. Together they carried us forward, through storms and silence, through hope and fear, and as long as we sailed, the scent of profit would follow, on our clothes, in our skin, and in every breath we took. The price of peace. Mombasa, 1635, a port on the brink. The harbour of Mombasa was alive with the low hum of tension when we sailed in. The city, a jewel of the East African coast, shimmered under the noon sun, whitewashed walls crowned with minarets, wooden dhows bobbing gently beside stone quays. Yet beneath the surface of this vibrant trade hub lay a current of unease, one that spoke louder than the clamour of merchants hawking their wares. We had come bearing our cargo, sacks of pepper, jars of cardamom, and fragrant bundles of dried ginger, spices prized not only for their flavour, but for the delicate balance of alliances they represented. The Indian Ocean was a web of commerce, woven tightly with politics. Every shipment, every deal, was a thread in that fragile fabric. I had arrived months earlier, carrying not just goods, but a delicate mission, to negotiate safe passage and favourable trade terms with the local sultan, whose favour was as mercurial as the tide. Mombasa was caught in the crossfire of larger powers. The Portuguese still lingered offshore, their cannons a looming threat, while the Omani Arabs pressed from the north, their ambitions casting long shadows over the city's future. The Sultan, young and wary, was a man whose smile could conceal a dagger as easily as a treaty. On the morning I was summoned to his palace, I felt the weight of countless voyages pressing down on me. The palace itself was a labyrinth of carved wood and marble, cool corridors echoing with whispers of power. My footsteps were swallowed by the silence as I was led into the Sultan's presence. He sat beneath a heavy canopy, dressed in robes that shimmered like the sea, his eyes sharp and calculating. Around him, advisors and guards watched silently. "Trader," he said, voice smooth as silk but edged with steel. "You bring spices from faraway lands, but spices are not the only currency. Here." I nodded carefully, aware that my words carried more weight than the gold coin I carried in my pouch. "Your ships sail through waters where alliances shift like desert sands," he continued. "Tell me, what price do you offer for peace, for a safe passage through these straits that are as treacherous as the men who sail them?" I spoke then of trust, of mutual benefit, of the prosperity that flowed when merchants and rulers worked hand in hand. But I knew words alone would not suffice. The Sultan's gaze flicked to my cargo hold, where barrels of clove and nutmeg waited. He was no fool. He knew the true value of my goods. "We accept your spices," he said, "but in return, you must swear loyalty to Mombasa. Your ships will fly our flag when they pass, and you will pay tribute to the Sultan's treasury." It was a demand heavy with implication, a promise that would bind my voyages to his rule and perhaps limit my freedom. I hesitated, weighing the risks. The ocean was vast, and the paths we took were many. But the cost of defiance was swift and unforgiving. "I will carry your flag," I said finally, "and pay the tribute, if it means my crew and cargo sail safely. But know this, our loyalty is earned, not bought." The Sultan smiled, a flash of approval or cunning I could not tell. As I left the palace, the city seemed transformed. The markets buzzed with a new energy, a fragile calm born of uneasy compromise. But that night, as I sat on deck beneath a sky dusted with stars, I thought of the price we had paid. Not just in coin or cargo, but in the surrender of autonomy, the subtle chains wrapped around our sails. The ocean stretched endlessly before us, a realm of freedom and peril. Yet now, our journeys were tethered to the whims of men like the Sultan, to the shifting tides of power that governed these waters. I breathed in the night air, thick with the mingled scents of salt and spice, and wondered what tomorrow's tide would bring. Would we sail as free men, or as servants of a throne far from home. In the end, in this world of fragrant riches and hidden dangers, the line between trader and pawn was as thin and fragile as a thread of saffron, precious, but easily broken. The Monsoon, off the coast of Sumatra, 1642, monsoon season. The Indian Ocean is a creature of moods, one moment calm and glistening under the sun, the next, a roaring beast ready to swallow ships whole. As we sailed south from the bustling ports of Gujarat, the sky grew heavy with dark clouds, the air thick with the scent of salt and rain. The monsoon was coming. We had just loaded our cargo, crates of saffron, cardamom, and a rare shipment of star anise, destined for markets, as far as Java and beyond. My crew was experienced, seasoned men who had faced storms before, but even they fell silent as the first winds began to stir, bending the sails and threatening the masts. I stood at the bow, gripping the weathered railing, watching as the horizon darkened. The sea churned with a sudden urgency, waves swelling like living mountains, crashing against our hull with the force of a battering ram. A storm splits the sky like a blade, tearing the clouds open to reveal flashes of lightning that illuminated the chaos around us. The thunder roared like the wrath of the gods, drowning out the shouts of my men as they scrambled to secure the cargo. The crates of spices, precious beyond measure, slammed against the wooden beams beneath deck. The scent of cinnamon and cloves, mixed with the salt spray, sharp and suffocating. I wondered, not for the first time, which would go overboard first, the cinnamon or the crew. The deck pitched wildly, throwing men off balance. I barked orders, but the storm was relentless, a force beyond our control. The rigging snapped with a deafening crack, sending ropes whipping through the air like serpents. Below deck, the hold creaked under the strain. I thought of the merchants waiting in distant ports, of promises made and debts owed. But in this moment, survival was the only currency that mattered. Hours passed in a blur of rain and wind. The sky was a relentless grey, the world reduced to the pounding of waves and the cries of the men. Faces streaked with salt and sweat stared back at me, exhaustion etched into every line. At one point, a rogue wave swept across the deck, knocking me to my knees. Water surged around us, icy and unforgiving. I tasted the sea on my lips and felt the cold clutch of fear. Yet even in the heart of the tempest, there was a strange beauty. The lightning revealed fleeting glimpses of the ocean's wild grandeur, a reminder that we were but small players in a vast, untamed world. When the storm finally passed, the sea settled into an uneasy calm. The sky was bruised purple and gold, and the air smelled fresh, like the promise of new beginnings. But the damage was done. Several crates were lost to the depths, and 2 men were missing when the dawn broke. The crew moved silently, their faces grim but resolute. We had paid the ocean's price, a toll as old as the trade routes themselves. As captain and trader, I carried the weight of loss and hope alike. The spices we salvaged would fetch a fortune, but they were stained now with salt and sacrifice. The monsoon had reminded me once again, no matter how far we travelled, no matter the riches we sought, we were forever at the mercy of the sea. And, in the quiet aftermath, as the sun rose over the waves, I vowed to honour those who did not return, by sailing onward, ever seeking the horizons where danger and destiny meet. The Sultan's Shadow. Mombasa, late 17th century. At the court of the Sultan. The sun was beginning its slow descent over the jagged rooftops of Mombasa, painting the harbour in molten gold and crimson. The air was thick with the scent of salt, smoke, and distant spices, cardamom, nutmeg, and something deeper, almost like earth after rain. I had come seeking passage and favour, but here, in the Sultan's court, the rules of trade were etched in shadows and silence. The city was a jewel perched on the edge of the Indian Ocean, a place where the wind carried stories as easily as it carried the dhow sails. Merchants, sailors, and envoys from all corners gathered in the bustling market, but none could bypass the Sultan's gaze. His power was absolute, his word law. To trade here was to step onto a stage where fortunes were won and lost in whispered deals and careful smiles. I had brought with me my finest cloves and cinnamon, the richest I had ever carried, and a chest of silver coins, gleaming like captured moonlight. But I knew well that wealth alone would not secure me favor. The Sultan's trust was earned, and I was a stranger in his realm. Inside the palace, the air was cooler, scented with frankincense and myrrh. The walls were adorned with intricate tilework and tapestries that told stories of conquest and faith. Servants moved silently, carrying trays of sweet dates and tea spiced with cardamom. When I was finally ushered into the Sultan's presence, his eyes held a calm that could freeze a man's blood. He was older than I expected, but there was a fire burning just beneath the surface, a quiet intelligence sharpened by years of ruling this crossroads of empires. He spoke slowly, choosing his words like a skilled trader weighing gold. "Your spices are renowned, traveler," he said, his voice low and smooth. "But here, spices are not merely goods. They are tokens of alliance and power." He gestured to a table laid with maps and charts, each marking trade routes, hidden coves and rival ports. There are those who would seek to block your passage, to claim your profits for themselves. I offer you protection, but it comes at a price. I nodded, understanding that this was not a simple bargain. To accept meant binding myself to the Sultan's will, to play a game where the stakes were survival and sovereignty. Over the next days, I navigated the labyrinth of court intrigue. Diplomats whispered warnings of rival factions, and I found myself caught between ancient feuds and fresh ambitions. Each meeting was a delicate dance, where one wrong move could send my ship and crew to the bottom of the sea. Yet in this web of power, I also found moments of unexpected humanity. A shared meal with a guard whose scars told stories of battles fought far from the sea. A quiet conversation with a court scholar who spoke of distant lands and forgotten gods. When at last the deal was struck, a promise of safe passage in exchange for a share of my cargo, I felt the weight of 1,000 eyes watching, waiting to see if I would falter or flourish. As I boarded my dhow to sail into the twilight, the city lights flickered behind me, and the Sultan's shadow stretched long across the waves. The ocean was still, but beneath its surface, currents of power and danger twisted unseen. I was reminded once more that the spice trade was not only a test of courage and skill, it was a journey through the hearts and minds of those who held the keys to the world's wealth, and in their shadows, I would continue to sail, forever balancing on the edge of trust and treachery, fortune and fate. Plague Wind, Indian Ocean, 1675, mid-voyage. The sea was calm that morning, deceptively serene under a pale sun that barely pierced the heavy clouds rolling in from the southwest. We had been at sea for weeks, the deck slick with salt spray, and the air thick with the mingled scents of my cargo, cloves, pepper, and turmeric. But beneath the routine, a silent threat was growing. It began with a cough in the galley, a man bent double and gasping like the ocean itself had filled his lungs. At first, we thought it a passing chill, the weariness of long voyages, but soon others fell ill, fever burning their skin, their eyes glassy and haunted. The ship's surgeon did what he could, but his medicines were little more than prayers and bitter roots. I watched from the quarterdeck as one by one the sick were carried below, faces pale and etched with fear. The spice-scented air turned sour, heavy with the smell of sickness and despair. We traders know the sea holds many dangers, storms, pirates, hungry waves, but disease is the cruelest foe. It moves unseen, invisible as the wind, striking without mercy or reason. The cargo hold became a grim reminder of what we carried, not only spices but death. I ordered the hold sealed as best we could, fearing contamination, though I knew The precious crates would absorb the taint. Their sweet fragrances now mingled with the stench of sickness. Each night, I walked the deck alone, the weight of command pressing down like the humid air before a storm. The crew's murmurs turned to whispers, whispers to silence. Men I had trusted since the first journey now lay broken in their hammocks or huddled in the corners, eyes hollow. The talisman, the stowaway child once carried, now hung around my neck, a small comfort against the rising dread. Some whispered it, held powers against the plague wind, but I knew better. Only caution and resolve could save us. We tried burning bundles of fragrant herbs, the smoke choking and thick, hoping to cleanse the air, but the sickness only tightened its grip. I rationed clean water, forced men into isolation, but fear grew faster than any fever. The spice that once promised fortune now seemed a cruel irony, its sweetness a mask for the bitter truth. We no longer smelled like men or merchants. We smelled like the shadow of death itself. Days passed, blurred by heat and sorrow. When the storm finally broke, it was a mercy and a menace, rain washing the decks, flooding the ship, threatening to drown what little hope remained. By the time we limped into port, the harbour was a ghost town, wary eyes watching as we docked. The spice merchants waited, but so did the healers, the guards, and the whispered warnings of quarantine. I stood on the pier, the salty breeze drying the sweat and tears on my face, knowing the price we had paid. The ocean had claimed more than cargo. It had taken brothers, friends, a part of my soul. Yet the trade must go on. Spices still called from distant lands, and the sea, cruel, capricious, and eternal, awaited the next voyage. The governor's inspection. Port of Surat, late 17th century, arrival at dawn. The early morning sun struggled to breach the thick veil of mist hanging over the harbour at Surat, a city alive with the clatter of hooves and calls of merchants, already hawking their wares in the market square. It was a hub for traders from every corner of the Indian Ocean, Persians, Gujaratis, Arabs and Europeans, all jostling for a piece of the spice fortune. But beneath the vibrant chaos, a darker presence lurked. The governor's ships, their black hulls cutting through the water like predators awaiting a catch. We had sailed hard for weeks to reach this port, the hold heavy with cinnamon and cardamom, pepper and clove, precious cargo destined for the wealthy nobles who prize these rare scents and flavours. But as we rounded the final bend into the harbour, word came down from the quarterdeck. The governor's men were boarding. There was no time to hide contraband or soften the truth. The governor's inspection was notorious, a labyrinth of demands, bribes, and dangers. No ship left Surat without paying its dues, in coin or in favour, and those who resisted often disappeared from the records altogether. My heart hammered in my chest as the boarding party climbed aboard. Their armour clinking, eyes sharp and searching, I stepped forward to greet them, face calm, hands steady. The face of the confident trader, not the man who feared the loss of everything he had worked for. The captain of the guard was a broad-shouldered man with a jagged scar running down. His cheek, a reminder that power was often won in blood as much as in rank. He eyed the crates with suspicion, prodding and lifting lids to reveal the rich spices within. "Where did this cargo come from?" he demanded, voice like gravel. "From the Malabar coast, good sir," I replied smoothly. "Freshly gathered, and bound for the markets of Surat and beyond." He nodded slowly, but his gaze didn't waver. "Any forbidden goods aboard? Precious stones, weapons, or contraband spices?" I forced a smile, heart pounding. The last thing I needed was to be caught smuggling, a sin punished by heavy fines or worse. Only the finest spices, as declared. The inspection dragged on, hours passing as the men rifled through every corner, testing the weight of sacks, unrolling cloth bundles and sniffing the air for anything amiss. My crew stood silent, faces taut with anxiety. When the governor's men finally moved to the hold, I held my breath. In that dim, fragrant space, secrets could easily be hidden, but not today. I had no illusions about the greed that ruled these waters. The captain turned back to me with a smirk. There is talk of a shipment of sandalwood from a neighboring kingdom, not declared in your manifests. Care to explain? I hesitated, weighing my words carefully. The sandalwood was part of a trade deal in Mangalore. It's lawful and paid for. He studied me for a long moment, then barked an order to his men to release the ship, but not before extracting a hefty payment, a gift, to the governor and his officers. The price was high, but so was the cost of refusal. As the men departed, the harbour buzzed once more with life, but I knew the tension had not left me. The inspection was a reminder that the spice trade was as much about politics and power as it was about cargo and commerce. Every voyage was a gamble, every port a new game. I climbed back aboard, chest tight but determined. The spices still waited in the hold, silent and fragrant, but I also carried the weight of debts unpaid and alliances fragile. The Indian Ocean was beautiful, cruel, and endlessly complex, and I was only one trader trying to navigate its treacherous waters. The sickness below deck, aboard the caravel Sea Jasmine, somewhere between Socotra and the Maldives, late 17th century. The sea stretched endlessly beneath an unyielding sun, waves shimmering like molten silver beneath the heavy sails of the Sea Jasmine. For weeks, the air had been thick with the scent of spices, the sharpness of pepper, the sweet warmth of cinnamon, and the earthy musk of cardamom. Yet no aroma could mask the growing unease that settled over the crew like a shadow. It began with whispers, a cough here, a shiver there. At first, the men blamed the sea air, the long hours on deck, or the restless nights, but soon the sickness revealed itself, moving stealthily through the ship's bones, down into the dark holds where the spices lay piled like silent sentinels. I remember the moment I saw Karim, my helmsman, pale and trembling, his eyes sunken yet burning with fever. He clutched his side, sweat slicking his forehead as he leaned against the railing, struggling for breath. The usual sharpness in his voice was gone, replaced by a weak whisper that sent a chill through me. "Captain, the men are falling ill," he said, voice breaking. Something isn't right." I swallowed hard, trying to mask my own fear. The holds were cramped and humid, the perfect breeding ground for sickness. But this felt different. There was a dark weight to it, as if the very spices we prized had become carriers of a hidden curse. We sealed the holds as best we could, but the disease had already crept into the quarters. One by one, the men grew weaker, their breaths shallow and rapid. I called upon the ship's healer, an old man with hands worn by years of tending wounds and ailments. He moved quietly among the sick, murmuring prayers and applying poultices made from crushed herbs and rare roots. Remedies passed, down from traders who had sailed these waters for generations. But the healer shook his head in despair. "This is no common fever," he said grimly. "The sickness feeds on the spirit as much as the body. We must pray for mercy." At night, I sat on the deck under a sky thick with stars, the salty breeze a cruel reminder of the vast isolation around us. The usual sounds of the ship, the creak of timbers, the slap of waves against the hull, were punctuated by coughs and moans from below. I paced restlessly, haunted by visions of those lost to the sickness, their faces pale and distant, slipping quietly away as the ship sailed on. The spices we carried, once symbols of wealth and life, now seemed like silent witnesses to the tragedy unfolding within. I wondered if the risk was worth it. The fortunes we sought on these waters, balanced against the lives we lost to unseen dangers. Days blurred into nights, and with every sunrise, the crew grew thinner, the weight of sickness heavier. I took to the wheel with grim determination, knowing that my survival, and that of what remained of my men, depended on reaching the next port before the disease consumed us all. When at last we sighted the distant outline of Mail, relief washed over me like a tide. But the battle was far from over. The city's healers awaited, and with them, hope. For now, I could only pray that the merciless sea and the unseen sickness would spare what little was left of my crew. In the end, the Indian Ocean taught me that every voyage carried more than just cargo. It bore the fragile threads of life and death, luck and fate, and the unbreakable will to survive. Thanks so much for listening to this story from the life of a spice trader navigating the Indian Ocean. If you enjoyed, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future episodes. I'd love to hear your thoughts or questions in the comments below. Until next time, safe travels and smooth seas.